In the spring of 1943, the North Atlantic lay under a gray sky that looked as cold as the water beneath it. The destroyer USS Stockton rolled through the swells, escorting a slow-moving convoy of merchant ships carrying fuel, ammunition, and food to Britain. The men aboard had grown used to the endless monotony of the ocean, the hiss of wind against steel, the groan of metal as the ship rose and fell, the distant hum of engines. But all of that vanished the moment the sonar operator leaned toward his headset and stiffened. His hand shot up. "Contact! Bearing 210, faint but steady." The bridge fell silent. The officers glanced at one another. They all understood what those few words meant. Somewhere below them, in the black water, a German U-boat was stalking the convoy, waiting for its moment to strike. The captain stepped forward, his voice low, steady. "Mark the bearing. Slow to 10 knots. Keep the convoy moving. All hands to anti-submarine stations." The ship changed in an instant. What seconds earlier had been a routine escort became a hunt. Every man knew that a U-boat could fire torpedoes without warning, and a single hit could split a freighter in half or send their own destroyer to the bottom. But the crew also knew that the one advantage they held was sound, the echo of their sonar, the heartbeat of the enemy submarine. If they could keep that contact alive, they had a chance. In the sonar room, the operator followed the faint returning ping, tracing the target as it glided through the deep. The screen showed nothing but darkness, yet each tiny echo revealed something: the direction the U-boat was moving, the distance, the angle of its turn. In this room, the war felt close, so close that even a whisper seemed too loud. The operator spoke again. "Contact, turning slowly, speed decreasing." They knew what that meant. The U-boat had heard them. It was trying to slip beneath the convoy, creeping deeper, lowering its engine noise, reducing its signature, trying to become invisible. The captain ordered the ship to accelerate. The destroyer surged forward, cutting through the water, unafraid of revealing itself. Above deck, sailors ran to their stations, manning the depth charge racks, checking fuses, adjusting firing mechanisms, securing lines. The wind whipped through their jackets, but no one noticed. They were listening to the ocean, waiting for the next command. Then something happened that every sailor dreaded. The sonar tone stuttered, grew faint, then vanished. Entire compartments felt the sudden emptiness. The operator struck the dial, adjusting settings, trying to reacquire the target, but the ocean returned only silence. A few seconds of silence at sea could feel like minutes. Minutes could feel like hours. Men clenched their fists, staring at the floor, knowing that in those seconds the U-boat might be turning, preparing to fire a torpedo straight into the destroyer. They all knew the stories: destroyers ripped open by shock waves, men thrown across decks, engines shattered, bulkheads crushed. In anti-submarine warfare, losing the contact meant losing control. The captain stood rigid, jaw set, eyes locked on the sonar compartment. The operator finally spoke again. "Faint trace, bearing 205, engines off." The Germans had cut power, sinking deeper, letting themselves drift silently. It was a dangerous tactic, but an effective one. The ocean hid them. The destroyer pressed forward, engines humming louder, bow slicing through the waves as if trying to force the sea to give up its secret. The men on deck felt the shift, knew the hunt had resumed, but no one celebrated. Keeping a contact was only the beginning. Depth charges were the end, and between those two moments lived terror. The destroyer closed distance, tracking the faint echo. The ocean around them felt colder, the sky lower, the wind sharper. The operator spoke again. "Stronger contact, bearing steady, Range decreasing. Target depth 150 meters. That was close enough. The captain lifted the receiver, his voice a calm that steadied the entire ship. Prepare to attack. The ship shuddered with a sudden increase in power, the bow rising slightly as the engines roared. Men braced themselves, gripping railings, boots planted wide. They all knew what came next. They were about to approach what they called kissing range, where the distance between their own ship and the enemy below would be so small that if their own depth charge detonated early, the blast could snap their bow in half. At 50 knots of wind, with freezing spray hitting their faces, they leaned into their stations, ready for the order. The ocean no longer rolled beneath them, it waited. The convoy faded behind them, the world shrinking to one destroyer, one submarine, and a patch of gray water where death swam hidden. The captain watched the sea, eyes narrowed. "Sonar, give me final bearing." The operator answered without hesitation. "Bearing 200, contact holding depth, still 150 meters. Captain shouted, "Helm, bring us in, straight up the line. All hands, stand ready." The destroyer turned and surged forward. The ocean exploded into white foam along the hull. The railings vibrated. The deck plates rattled. Men locked their eyes on the water where nothing could be seen. Yet everything waited. Beneath them, the enemy moved silently, an invisible shape sliding through pressure and darkness. Finally, the captain gave the order, "All hands, fire when ready!" The tension snapped. The hunt had begun for real. No turning back, no hesitation. Only the deadly quiet certainty that they were now racing toward a submarine they could not see, with weapons that could kill them if used an instant too early. The moment the ship entered kissing range, every heartbeat aboard felt louder than the sea itself. The moment the destroyer committed to the attack run, the entire ship transformed into a single-purpose machine. Every man knew exactly what kissing range meant, and the thought of it tightened every muscle in his body. The destroyer had to close in so tightly on the U-boat that it was practically charging over the submarine's last known position. The margin for error was measured in seconds and meters. One wrong calculation, and the blast from their own depth charges could break their keel or flip them sideways like a toy boat in a bathtub. Above deck, the wind whipped across the steel plates, stinging exposed skin with cold salt spray. The bow rose and fell violently as the ship accelerated, white water exploding outward in great sheets that washed over the forward gun mount. The engine room increased throttle until the deck vibrated beneath the sailors' boots, humming with raw power. The sea was unforgiving, and the destroyer was forcing its way through like a blade through heavy cloth. Down in the sonar compartment, the operator leaned forward, headphones pressed tightly against his ears, sweat forming at his hairline despite the cold. He whispered the bearings almost in a trance. "Contact. Steady. 200. Speed minimal. She is trying to drift, sir." The Germans knew they had been detected, and they were hoping to vanish. The U-boat was running silent, engines off, allowing the natural currents to carry her in unpredictable directions. This was the most dangerous moment for both sides. For the Germans, silence was a shield. For the Americans, silence meant the target could disappear at any moment. The captain stood behind the sonar operator, eyes locked on the rolling trace chart, adjusting his own internal map of the battlefield. He understood that the sonar echo was not a picture, but a heartbeat, a faint pulse of sound bouncing off steel hundreds of feet below. If that pulse vanished, the hunter would become the hunted. The operator's voice rose again, stronger now. "Target depth increasing 170-180. They are diving, sir." The captain turned to the helmsman. "Steady as she goes. Bring us right over their last course." The destroyer leaned into the turn. the hull groaning softly as it shifted against the weight of water. The sailors on deck braced against the railings, their eyes scanning the surface for any sign of a periscope, wake, or the shimmer of oil. But the sea revealed nothing. The ocean looked empty, flat, and calm, its silence mocking the danger hidden beneath. The depth-charge crew waited at their stations, standing beside rows of cylindrical steel bombs, each one capable of releasing enough pressure to crush a submarine like an eggshell. One sailor checked the fuse settings again, his hands trembling slightly as he aligned them to the correct depth, 180 meters. The senior gunner's mate stepped beside him, gripping his shoulder. "Nobody touches these again. No mistakes. Not this close." Every man understood why. They were approaching the range where an early blast would rip into their own hull. The men called it kissing range, because at that distance it felt like they were close enough to kiss the enemy through the waves. The ship's loudspeaker crackled. "Attack run commencing. Stand by." To the crew the words felt heavy, like a final warning. The destroyer surged forward, the vibration from the engines deepening until the deck vibrated beneath the sailors' boots, humming with raw power. The sea was unforgiving, and the destroyer was forcing its way through like a blade through heavy cloth. Down in the sonar compartment, the operator leaned forward, headphones pressed tightly against his ears, sweat forming at his hairline despite the cold. He whispered the bearings almost in a trance. "Contact. Shallow. Change. Watch for maneuver." He sensed something, the small distortions in the echo pattern that hinted at movement. The U-boat was adjusting depth or angle, but he could not be certain. The captain made his decision. "Release pattern 1." The order crashed through the ship. Everyone moved. A sailor yanked the pin on the first depth charge, sending the heavy steel cylinder rolling down the chute and into the turning wake. Several more followed, tumbling off both sides of the stern. Each charge hit the surface with a hollow splash, then plunged down, disappearing into the dark. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The crew gripped the railings, feeling the destroyer surge forward, pulling away quickly to avoid the shock wave. Then the ocean erupted. A massive, muffled blast shook the entire ship, followed by another and another. The deck buckled slightly under the force. The steel plates vibrated violently. Water geysers rose behind them, lifting white columns into the air and raining down in sheets. The destroyer rocked sideways under the pressure, the bow dipping sharply before rising again. A few men fell to their knees, gripping the deck as the tremors surged through the steel under their feet. A gunner at the aft station shouted over the roar, "Feels like she is tearing herself apart." The shock waves rolled under the hull with bone-shaking fury. The ocean foamed violently where the charges had detonated, boiling up from the deep in swirling white clouds. The captain held the railing, knuckles whitening, eyes fixed on the turbulent water. They were so close to the blasts that the metal beneath them seemed to ring like a struck bell. The ship groaned, but held together. The worst danger had passed, but the deadliest part was still ahead. Silence. The sonar room reported no contact, no echo, no heartbeat. Only the vast quiet of the Atlantic. The crew waited, breath held, lungs tight. The battleship still cut through the waves, engines lowering to a steady thrum. The water behind them churned slowly, settling. Gunners and lookouts leaned forward, staring at the water for any sign of a periscope, wake, or the shimmer of oil. But the sea revealed nothing. The ocean looked empty, flat and calm, its silence mocking the danger hidden beneath. The captain gave the order. "Bring us around for another pass, sonar reacquire target." The operator swallowed hard, fingers trembling slightly as he swept the waters beneath them, searching desperately. The ocean answered with silence. The crew prepared for another run. They knew the truth now. The U-boat was still alive, or drifting, or hiding somewhere below, and they had to dive back into kissing range again, as many times as it took, because that was the only way to kill a submarine. They had to get close, close enough to risk everything, close enough to feel the blast shake their bones, close enough to turn the ocean itself into a weapon, against an enemy they could not see, but had to destroy, before it destroyed them. The destroyer completed its turn and lined up for another attack run, the bow cutting a sharp path through the rolling gray water, while every man aboard felt the familiar tightening in his gut that warned them they were seconds away from unleashing a weapon powerful enough to break steel hundreds of feet beneath the waves. The air on deck felt colder now, as if the ocean itself sensed what was coming and had drawn a long breath, waiting for the violence that would follow. The sonar operator relayed the new contact bearing, shifting slightly, shadow unstable but present. The U-boat was moving or drifting or trying to slip into a deeper layer of water where sound traveled differently. The captain snapped orders with clipped precision. Helm, adjust starboard. Depth charge cruise, stand by, release depth, 200 meters. Engines growled louder as the ship accelerated once more into kissing range. The men braced themselves, boots wide, hands gripping the cold steel railing while icy spray slapped into their faces. The destroyer heaved forward, then dipped sharply as it rode over the swell. Every vibration, every groan of the hull reminded them that at this speed and distance, even a small miscalculation could doom them all. The gunners at the stern watched the sea behind them churning into white foam as the ship tore forward. The weight of the depth charges gleamed with oily sheen, stacked in racks like giant steel drums waiting to be unleashed. The senior gunner barked, "Check fuses, final check before release. No errors." Men ran hands over the settings, adjusting tiny dials with frozen fingers. "Depth 200 set, ready." The captain shouted, "When ready, fire." The first charge rolled down the chute, slamming into the water with a heavy splash. It sank in seconds, swallowed by the sea. The next followed, then another, the rhythm of metal and water filling the air as each charge dropped into the depths. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then the ocean erupted. The first explosion hit like a giant fist, smashing upward through the water and into the hull. The destroyer rocked violently, men staggering sideways as the deck vibrated with a sharp metallic scream. The shock wave traveled through the ship like a pulse of pure force, rattling bulkheads and banging tools loose from hooks. A geyser of white water shot up behind the stern, climbing higher than the aft gun mount before collapsing in a roar of spray. The second blast struck seconds later, deeper, stronger, sending another violent tremor through the hull that made sailors grit their teeth as pain shot through their legs. The third explosion bloomed even closer, blasting the surface into a churning whirlpool of foam and black smoke. The entire stern lifted slightly, jolted upward by the force before slamming back into the sea. Every man felt the impact in his bones. The ocean around them writhed as if alive, boiling from the energy unleashed below. On the bridge, the captain gripped the railing, feeling each shock wave roll through the steel beneath his feet. His face remained calm, but his arms tensed against the violent shuddering, knowing that one premature detonation would send their ship into a crippling dive or tear open the hull as if it were made of paper. The gunners at the stern watched the sea behind them churning into white foam as the ship tore forward. The weight of the depth charges gleamed with oily sheen, stacked in racks like giant steel drums waiting to be unleashed. The senior gunner barked, "Check fuses, final check before release, no errors." Men ran hands over the settings, adjusting tiny dials with frozen fingers. "Depth 200 set, ready." The captain shouted, "When ready, fire." The first charge rolled down the chute, slamming into the water with a heavy splash. It sank in seconds, swallowed by the sea. The next followed, then another, the rhythm of metal and water filling the air as each charge dropped into the depths. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then the ocean erupted. The first explosion hit like a giant fist, smashing upward through the water and into the hull. The destroyer rocked violently, men staggering sideways as the deck vibrated with a sharp metallic scream. The shockwave traveled through the ship like a pulse of pure force, rattling bulkheads and banging tools loose from hooks. A geyser of white water shot up behind the stern, climbing higher than the aft gun mount before collapsing in a roar of spray. The second blast struck seconds later, deeper, stronger, sending another violent tremor through the hull that made sailors grit their teeth as pain shot through their legs. The third explosion bloomed even closer, blasting the surface into a churning whirlpool of foam and black smoke. The entire stern lifted slightly, jolted upward by the force before slamming back into the sea. Every man felt the impact in his bones. The ocean around them writhed as if alive, boiling from the energy unleashed below. On the bridge, the captain gripped the railing, feeling each shock wave roll through the steel beneath his feet. His face remained calm, but his arms tensed against the violent shuddering, knowing that one premature detonation would send their ship into a crippling dive or tear open the hull as if it were made of paper. The gunners at the stern watched the sea behind them churning into white foam as the ship tore forward. The destroyer pulled clear of the danger zone, its stern dripping with seawater and black residue from the blasts. The ocean behind them churned with white bubbles and swirling eddies as if something deep below had been torn apart. Yet no one cheered. They all knew that even the most violent explosions did not guarantee a kill. The captain ordered, "Slow speed, maintain course, prepare for sonar recheck." The crew exhaled in shallow, uncertain breaths, listening to the sea as if waiting for it to speak again. The sonar operator wiped sweat and seawater from his forehead and leaned in, tuning the receiver, spinning the dial with precise small movements, searching for the faintest echo. The room held its breath. The entire ship felt suspended in that moment as the sea calmed behind them. The operator whispered, "Static only, no contact." Then he stopped suddenly, leaning closer. Something there. Faint, metallic, bearing 210, weak but definite. He raised his voice, "Contact regained." The men on deck stiffened and looked at one another. Some cursed under their breath, others felt a strange relief. The U-boat was still alive. But that meant something else, too. The attack run had not been close enough, not deep enough, not deadly enough. And the destroyer would have to charge back into kissing range once more. The captain took the report calmly, though his jaw tightened. "Bring us around for another pattern. We stay on her until the sea gives her up." The destroyer turned sharply, the bow carving a white arc across the dark surface. The men swallowed hard, tasting salt and fear, but no one hesitated. They returned to their stations, gripping rails, resetting fuses, checking release mechanisms, bracing muscles aching from the last shock wave. The ocean had not yet yielded oil, debris, or wreckage. The fight was far from over. The U-boat was wounded, or maneuvering, or hiding in the cold black layers beneath them, waiting for its chance to strike back. The destroyer gathered speed, engines roaring once more as it surged toward the next attack run. And every man aboard knew what it meant. They were heading back into the mouth of danger, toward the same deadly dance where the line between hunter and hunted was thin enough to drown a ship in seconds. But that was the reality of the Atlantic War. To kill a submarine, you had to get close. Close enough to feel the ocean explode beneath you. Close enough to sense the enemy through the trembling steel. Close enough for death to reach for both sides at once. Close enough for the sailors to call it what it truly was: kissing range. The destroyer swung back into its turn, engines rumbling deep in the hull as the wake fanned out behind her in a wide, white arc. The men on deck were still steadying themselves from the last shock wave, knees aching, arms trembling from holding onto the rails through the violent shaking, but none of them stepped back from their stations. Even exhausted, soaked, and chilled, they knew the truth better than anyone. A U-boat that survived one attack run often became more dangerous on the next. It learned. It adapted. It struck when the hunter thought the kill was certain. Below deck, the sonar operator lowered the headphones over his ears with hands that shook only slightly. He steadied himself, then dropped into the seat. He tuned the receiver carefully, adjusting gain, depth filters, and frequency. His eyes narrowed. Contact, shifting bearing 208, faint but moving. The operator knew a drifting submarine sounded different from one trying to escape. The signature now was uneven, irregular, as if the German captain was making desperate adjustments to depth or angle, trying to break contact. The destroyer's captain heard the report and made his decision instantly. "Helm, bring us back up the line, stay with her." Engines surged louder, shaking the lights overhead. No one questioned the order. No one needed to. The entire crew knew they were beginning a new phase of the fight, the long, brutal hunt that tested the nerves of even the veterans. The first attack had been a strike. The second would be a chase. On deck, the wind cut across the steel like a blade. Salt spray whipped across faces and stung eyes. Men blinked through it, gripping rails, tightening life jackets, and leaning into the cold force. A lookout on the bow pointed out over the whitecaps, shouting through the wind, "Nothing on the surface but churn, sir." He meant there was no oil slick, no debris, no broken wood, but they all knew the truth. A U-boat did not die quietly. If the enemy submarine had been destroyed, there would have been signs, a bloom of oil rising from the deep, a scattering of splintered planks, a trail of bubbles, but the ocean showed nothing, only the restless, rolling gray expanse that seemed to conceal more than it revealed. The captain stared ahead, jaw tense, then turned toward the weapons crew. "Reset fuses, 220 meters, prepare pattern 2. The depth charge team moved with mechanical precision, unlocking racks, resetting dials, adjusting charges. They did not speak except to confirm numbers and checks. Even the tough veterans felt their hands unsteady. Fatigue had set into their bones. The last run had rattled them deep. Their arms and shoulders throbbed from holding onto the rails through the shock wave. But none of that mattered. The ocean demanded absolute readiness. A single mistake could kill them faster than any enemy shell. One sailor whispered as he checked the fuse alignment again, "Do it right or die doing it." His partner nodded wordlessly. The destroyer began closing in. The bow slammed through waves at high speed, throwing sheets of icy water over the deck. The ship groaned and vibrated with every swell. The wind rose, howling across the superstructure, blowing spray into the faces of men gripping the aft rails. The sonar operator called out again, louder. "Contact, steady bearing, increasing speed, slight dive. She knows we are coming." A U-boat under attack had two options: dive deeper or try to outrun the destroyer. The Germans knew their submarine could go deeper than the depth charges were set for, but they also knew the deeper they went, the harder it became to maneuver and the more likely the destroyer's sonar would lock onto them. The chase became a duel of senses, hearing versus silence, sound versus shadow. The destroyer plunged forward, the U-boat slipping ahead, unseen, somewhere in the dark below. The captain snapped more orders to the helm and engine room. "Maintain full speed, close distance, depth charge crews, stand by." On the deck, the sailors steadied themselves. They had done this before, dozens of times. Some survived multiple hunts, but it never became easier. Every attack run demanded the same discipline, the same endurance, the same willingness to risk their lives at kissing range, where a single early blast could rip their destroyer in half. They were soaked through to their skin, boots waterlogged, uniforms heavy with spray, faces red from wind and cold, breath forming white clouds in the air. The pursuit continued for minutes that felt like hours. Sonar callouts came steadily, bearing shifting, depth increasing, drift speed changing. The U-boat was fighting to survive, twisting, turning, plunging deeper and rising again, trying to break the pattern, trying to find the gap in the destroyer's tracking. The operator sensed the struggle in the sound, the faint metallic ring of a hull under stress, the rapid adjustments in pitch when an engine sputtered back to life, then cut off again. He whispered under his breath, "They are scared. They know we are here." Hardly anyone was calm now. The tension felt thick enough to choke on, but there was something else. Fear of failure. Because a wounded U-boat was the most dangerous. A submarine that escaped after a depth charge run often surfaced hours later to launch torpedoes into the convoy. They could slip behind transports, fire in the night, and vanish beneath the waves again, leaving wreckage burning on the surface, men screaming for help in freezing water. They would not let this one escape, not tonight, not on their watch. As they approached the new attack point, the destroyer slowed slightly, aligning for the perfect run. The captain's voice boomed through the loudspeaker. "Attack point in 30 seconds. All stations prepare for release." Every sailor braced. He could feel his heart pounding against his ribs. He could feel the icy water running down his collar. He could feel the ship trembling as the bow plowed through waves toward another deadly pass. The sonar operator called out again. "Bearing locked, range decreasing, contact level 190, steady. Hold her steady, sir." The captain lifted his hand. The crew braced for the violent shock of the next detonation. The ocean swelled under the bow as the ship dove into kissing range again. The order was seconds away. The U-boat was still fighting, still alive, still trying to slip back into the darkness of the Atlantic. But the destroyer was not letting go. Not until the sea gave up the submarine. Not until oil or wreckage rose to the surface. Not until the hunters knew with absolute certainty that this deadly game of silence and echoes was finally over. The destroyer lunged into its final attack run, engines thundering through the hull as the crew locked themselves into position. The men could feel each vibration in their bones, the deep mechanical tremor that rose through their boots and into their chests. The air was sharp with cold and diesel, the sea whipped into a frenzy around the bow, as if trying to push the ship away from the danger that waited below. But the destroyer pressed forward, refusing to yield. The sonar operator leaned in close to his console, tracking the faint return ping that marked the U-boat's last known position. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "Contact. Firm bearing 190. Depth steady, slight drift. They are wounded, sir." The captain nodded, eyes narrowing. "Helm, bring us up the line. Prepare charges, pattern 3220 meters." The destroyer lined up with measured precision, cutting through waves that slammed against the hull in heavy thuds. The men at the depth charge racks made their final checks, fingers numb from cold, adjusting fuse caps, wiping seawater from the dials. The senior gunner glared at each man. "One mistake, and we go down before they do." When the order came, his voice bellowed over the storm. "Fire!" All at once the heavy steel cylinders dropped into the sea, plummeting into the depths. The sailors braced, fists gripping the rails, shoulders set, jaws clenched. The explosions came in a chain of thunderous pulses. The first blast ripped through the water, lifting the stern upward in a violent jolt. A muffled roar echoed through the hull as plates rattled like shaken armor. The second explosion came deeper, stronger, shaking the entire ship from keel to mast. Men lost their footing, grabbing at anything bolted down. The third burst sent a plume of white water rising behind them like a geyser, the shockwave rocking the destroyer on its side before it stabilized again. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing else happened, only the sound of the engines, only the cold hiss of wind across steel, only the crew breathing hard, staring back at the churning, roiling water behind the stern. Then everything went silent. The captain ordered engines to half. The destroyer slowed, cutting gently through the waves, leaving only a faint wake. The men gathered at the rails, dripping, soaked hands gripping the cold metal, eyes fixed on the shattered surface behind them. The sonar operator called out nervously, "No contact, sir!" Repeating, "No contact!" The silence was heavy, too heavy. Every sailor knew the next few seconds would reveal the truth. Victory, defeat, or the worst possible outcome, a wounded U-boat preparing to fire torpedoes in retaliation. The lookout on the port side stared into the waves, eyes narrowing against the glare. "Sir, I see bubbles." Not just the white froth stirred up by the ship, but a stream of darker, thicker bubbles rising from below. The men leaned closer, heartbeats quickening. A moment later, a slick of oil surfaced, spreading across the gray water in a thin, shimmering sheet. It expanded rapidly, pushed upward by something far below. The senior gunner whispered, "That is fuel from a cracked tank, sir." Then came fragments, first small splinters of painted wood, then a torn strip of rubber, likely from insulation or a gasket. Then more bubbles and a darker smear of oil rising in uneven pulses. The ocean seemed to exhale. The captain straightened, arms behind him, voice quiet but firm. "Confirmed kill." The news traveled across the deck faster than any shout. Some men lowered their heads in relief, others exhaled shakily. A few simply sank to the deck, exhausted, letting the cold seawater soak into their uniforms. Their hands trembled, not from fear now, but from the sudden release of tension, the end of hours spent fighting an enemy they could not see. Many expected cheering, but no one cheered. Not here, not for this kind of victory. The men who fought submarines understood better than most that the war beneath the waves was not a clean fight. They never saw the enemy, never exchanged fire face to face, never boarded a captured vessel. They hunted shadows and destroyed them. They won by erasing something that remained invisible until its death left only oil and debris. The destroyer began circling slowly around the kill site, lookouts watching the water for any surviving sailors. There were none. The U-boat had died far below, crushed by pressure and fire. The captain gave the order to resume escort formation. The convoy was still miles away, still vulnerable, still depending on the destroyer to keep more unseen predators at bay. The men returned to their stations, some limping from the violent shaking, others rubbing bruises formed during the attack. A young sailor at the stern said softly, "They never surface when we get them. We never see them. Just the proof that they are gone." Another replied, "That is the job. We fight what hides, and the ocean hides everything." The destroyer increased speed, engines humming steadily as she moved back toward the convoy. The men understood that before the day ended, the sonar might ring again, signaling another contact, another chase, another deadly run into kissing range. Because in the Battle of the Atlantic, victory was never final. It was only borrowed, bought one thunderous explosion at a time, with sailors who risked being as close to death as the enemy they hunted. The sea behind them grew calm again, hiding the wreck of the U-boat deep beneath its gray surface, and the destroyer steamed on silently toward its next encounter in a war where triumph lived in the thin, fragile line between sound and silence, between hunter and hunted, and between the living and the lost.